Hey everyone, Adam Holz here, director of Plugged In, and I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Paul Asay, who is senior associate editor for Plugged In. And last night, Paul and I had the terrific privilege, it felt like, to go to a movie, and not just any movie, to go to a big movie, maybe one of the biggest of the year, and certainly the movie everybody is watching to have a sense of what's going to happen with the box office.
Yeah.
That movie is Christopher Nolan's Tenet. And Paul and I wanted to get together and just talk about the film, talk about its content, talk in a spoiler-free way about the story, and just give you a sense of what you can expect if you go to this movie. And here's the super cool thing about our conversation today. We haven't talked about it at all. I mean, not even a little bit, because obviously we're not in the office together.
Right.
I'm at home, and I assume Paul is at home. If he's not, he's got some really great books behind him either way. And we're looking forward to having a fun conversation. One of the things we do at Plugged In quite a lot is have pretty terrific offline conversations, and hopefully the unscripted and unvarnished nature of the talk we're about to have will give you a sense of kind of what life at Plugged In is like. So enough preamble from me. Paul, I'm going to give you the extraordinarily unenviable task of telling people what on earth this movie is about.
Oh my
What do we have?
goodness. Oh my goodness. Once I figure it out, I'll be able to tell you.
Yeah,
Now,
seriously.
essentially, it's this time. To say it's a time travel movie is a little bit misleading in a way, right?
Yeah.
It does involve a lot of time shifting. Essentially, you have this CIA agent who gets embroiled in a new super secret agency, essentially, where they're sort of time cops. There's some weird sort of anomalies, but in the future, some scientists have developed this way to manipulate time, and you're starting to see some of those time shifts go back into time, into their time. Um, and now there's this evil megalomaniac Russian who's
Always
who
wanted to do
wants
that.
to
Thank
play
you.
with time for his own nefarious ends. It's terrible. So the whole setup is essentially this guy, this who we only know as the protagonist. He has to stop this evil Russian from doing what he wants to do. It is a very, very strange movie. Christopher Nolan is known for some pretty bizarre setups. Inception was sort of a mind bender. Interstellar had its mind-bending moments. Even Dunkirk, which seems like a pretty straightforward movie, it had 3 separate timelines that you were dealing with.
And one of his earlier ones, Memento, is
Right.
another that totally you get done and you're like, what did I just watch?
Exactly. It's almost a story told in reverse order in a way. And this one is his weirdest and most ambitious yet. There are times when it feels super smart. There are times when it feels kind of dumb. It's a very strange movie, but it does make you think. And I guess that's one of the things about Christopher Nolan's movies. They often let you leave the theater thinking, and that's unusual for a movie.
Yeah, I would agree. So, Paul, that feels like a good segue to my next question that I just came up with. What does it make you think about?
Oh, it does make you think about time. It makes you think they deal with every sort of time-related paradox that you can possibly imagine. They talk a lot about the grandfather paradox, which is essentially if you go back in time and kill your grandfather, are you actually there to kill your
So
grandfather?
it's not I am my own grandpa. That's not the grandfather premise.
Exactly. No, that's not it. So it does make you think about the nature of time, but it also makes you, and even the movie even makes a few allusions in this direction, makes you think about destiny and free will and sort of the nature of how we spend our own time, even though it's much more linear than what we see in this movie. I think it makes you further aware of the preciousness of every second. Not to get too deep or spiritual on it. But I do think that it does make you think about the value of time and using it wisely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think as I sat there very early on, and I don't feel like I'm a slouch as a movie
Right.
watcher.
Right.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your agreement. Um, very, very early on, I thought, I think I missed something. Like there's a scene in the beginning where there's an attack on this Russian opera house, and I have to use my hands, there are good cops that show up to
Oh
combat the
yeah.
terrorists, but in the good cops, there are terrorists posing as cops. And then I think what happened, because I'm not sure, is that you have good guys posing as bad guys, posing as good guys. And seriously, after the first 10 minutes, I sort of gave up on trying to follow the logic. And I
Yeah.
thought, I'm going to just kind of watch the big picture here, which is something to do with if we don't solve these problems in time, literally in time and in time,
Right.
bad things happen, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And it really is one of those movies where you feel like you have to watch it twice to
Or a
really
hundred
understand.
times.
Exactly, to really understand what's going on. It's an interesting thing for us because we've been watching a lot of movies online where you can rewind, you can
Right.
try to check out certain things. This is a movie that I desperately, desperately wanted to do that because
Yeah.
writing the review, you knew you were going to have to make some sort of sense of it. So I did
Yeah.
my
But
best.
I think your saving grace here is that as I've looked at some other reviews, nobody's really made good sense of this movie.
Yeah.
Like I was doing some radio work earlier today. And I said, I think maybe if you were an astrophysicist with a really strong grasp on quantum physics, you could get this. And yet, methinks that Mr. Nolan may have just pulled some of those words from quantum physics in to do his own storytelling thing, which is pretty compelling.
Well, and that's exactly right. I mean, like I say, it's pretty smart, maybe kind of dumb. It's hard to tell, and I'm still sort of weighing those two because I'm not exactly sure. It's probably a little bit of both, to be honest with you. Um,
So let's put our plugged in hats on. We've sort of talked about the film from an aesthetic point of view. We've talked about some of the big ideas, a little bit about the plot. Honestly, I don't know how you would spoil this plot because it goes in so many different directions simultaneously.
yeah.
To me, it felt a little bit like if Jason Bourne had been an extra in Inception. You know, I got done. I'm like, is it a spy movie? Is it an action movie? Is it a war movie? Is it a caper? Is it a heist movie?
Right.
Like
Right.
huge chunks of the movie feel like a heist movie.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is yes to all of those things. It's all of them. And if there's a weakness, it's perhaps that Christopher Nolan didn't know which of those particular genres he was most interested in. So he just dropped them all in the blender. Anyway, back to my question. What do parents need to know from a plugged in perspective?
Well, I think the first thing we need to get back to is that it is just confusing. If you
Yeah.
bring in kids, there's a good chance that they might not understand it, or there's a
Or your
potential, I suppose.
parents. You could bring your parents and they might not understand it.
Oh man, I was thinking of my parents actually who were watching this. This is not a movie they would have enjoyed, but I do think that there are some cautionary elements. This is a
Yeah.
PG-13 movie. Um, Honestly, you don't see a ton of blood or a ton of violence on screen. I think that in your typical superhero movie, you probably see quote unquote more violence,
Hmm.
but because of Christopher Nolan's vibe, it feels grittier. It feels
Yeah.
grimmer. It feels tougher. Even though you don't see as much of it on screen, it feels just, ugh. It's painful to watch in places, even though you're not actually seeing anything on screen.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally. And the one place I really felt that was a scene early on where there's obviously torture happening and you don't really see the torture at all, I
no,
don't think, but it's very clear what's being implied. And when a bloody implement is set down, sometimes what you don't see is more disturbing than what you do see. And at that point I thought, oh man, how, are we going to go full 24 here? I mean, what's going
Right.
to happen with
Right.
if we're starting with torture? But in a way, to me, that was the most disturbing scene, and the rest of it was pretty violent, but pretty sanitized,
Right.
really. You
Right.
know?
You don't see a lot of blood. You see a lot of explosions. People get shot. People fight. There's one scene that struck me as particularly painful to watch, and that was there's a man who essentially beats up a woman. Um,
Yeah,
that was really
that was a
difficult to
tough scene.
watch. That was a really tough scene. So
Yeah.
be aware of that. But for the most part, it didn't feel as when you watch it, you tabulate as we do in Plugged In. When you tabulate the actual scenes, it felt lighter in some ways, or it looked lighter in some ways than Mission Impossible, but felt much heavier.
Yeah, and there is a sense of gravitas. I mean, I
Mhm.
think if you've seen any of Christopher Nolan's movies, I think one of the things he excels at as a storyteller is the ability to communicate there is really something at stake here.
Right.
And if if evil triumphs, we have a problem. And I thought one of the things that I appreciated because it sort of felt like here's the moral anchor. Um, a couple of times the good guy, the protagonist, either does or ponders doing some bad things. And at one point, someone suggests that he's just as morally culpable and compromised as everybody else in this movie. And he basically says, no, I'm the protagonist. And so I felt like there was, whatever you make of that, what I made of it was Nolan wanted to give us a moral plumb line. That even though there's this wacky stuff happening in every direction, temporally and every other direction, that he was trying to say actually fighting for the right things for the right reasons is still important, even if those heroes sometimes have to make some tough decisions along the way. Would you agree with that, Paul?
I would totally agree with that. I would totally
That's
agree with that. And I think that that's an interesting thing when you look at Nolan's vibe overall. You know, when you're talking about a lot of his movies, most of them have been PG-13,
yeah,
and yet they come with this sense of reality, this grim reality.
yeah,
Um, that's that's a curious talent that he has, and it just sort of
yeah.
reminded me as you talk about sort of that moral plumb line. He's able to get at some of these ambiguous realities of life, but does it in a way that doesn't completely fall off the ledge, you know,
No,
from a
and
plugged in point of view.
totally. And I think that the other through line with his stuff is this issue of time. Because if you look at Interstellar,
Right.
you look at this, you look at almost everything you've done. You look at almost everything he's done. It's got this sense of even if we can't always follow it, there's something that matters that's happening in time. Or in Dunkirk, where
Right.
the clock never stops. Like you're
Yeah.
never not aware of the time. In Inception, it's been a while since I saw Inception, but even in Inception, you get the sense that things are folding in on themselves, and if you don't figure it out in time, you're going to be in trouble. So, again, this may be his timiest movie of all in the ways that he is quite literally playing with the idea of time.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's a big theme in his work, and it's an important theme for all of us. And that's one of the
Yeah,
things I think I value about it is with with Nolan's ability to twist time in his own narrative way, it really does make you, like I said at the very top of this, it makes you think about your own time. It
yeah,
makes you consider, and it makes you consider what's really precious within that time. You know, going back to Interstellar. That might be the greatest example that I can think of where time feels precious
yeah.
and where you feel like time is being lost. This is more a twisty, bendy, puzzler type of a movie. It doesn't have necessarily that emotional anchor that Interstellar, I think,
Right.
did, but you still feel the weight of time in every single second of this movie.
Yeah. Even when time is running backwards. And with that thought, I'm aware that our time is limited today. But I hope that as Paul and I have talked today, it's given you a sense of what you can expect with this movie and the kinds of conversations that we have amongst ourselves that we hope to have with you too. So leave us a comment on what you've thought about what we've said today. If you have seen Interstellar and you're like, guys,
What
you
is up?
totally biffed this so hard, we love to be corrected, right, Paul?
Oh, we love it so much, so much.
But what we
And
really love, I think, is really helping give you the tools you need to make a good decision for your family. So I think there's some great takeaway ideas that you could kick around here. I think in some ways this is the mother of all discussion starter kind of movies.
yeah,
Uh, and it's a rabbit hole you could go down and argue about for a long
yeah.
time.
But be sure to check out the plugged in review because there's
Yeah,
some content issues that you just need to be aware of. This feels like it's negotiable for some families. For others, it might just be a hard stop. So check out the full review before you go see it.
absolutely. Thanks, Paul, for talking about this today.
Thanks, Adam, for letting me talk about it. It was great.
Perhaps in time we will do it again. And thanks to all of you who've watched today for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.